Hey everybody, in this video we're going to go over how to create a stock screener in Excel. And so what a stock screener is, it allows you to filter stocks based on a set of criteria, so like dividend yield, price to earnings ratios, 52-week change, and all sorts of different metrics. And so the first thing you're going to need is some sort of a data set to make this work. So I've downloaded the information in front of me from barchart.com. So I've got 1,000 stocks here, a bunch of different fields that I can filter on, and I'm going to use this for the basis of my screener. Obviously, you can get the information from anywhere. This is just a free example that you can try for yourself. So the first thing I'm going to do is, to make this screener easy to use, I'm going to insert some rows at the top. And the reason being is I want to enter in my fields and my inputs here, and then have my results down here, because it's going to be easier to navigate. And what I can do is freeze panes here. I go into View, Freeze Panes, and so that way I can easily scroll through the results here while still having my inputs visible. Another thing I'm going to do is adjust the column widths here just to make the fields easier to read. And I'm going to convert some of these to dollars. Again, just so it's more presentable, easier to see. So obviously you can do this however you want. I guess probably need decimals for those ones. So now that I've got this set up, now I'm going to do is create some actual fields. So I'm going to copy these values here, right click, paste special, transpose, and I'll align these using the general format so they're left aligned. Next up, I'm going to grab the next 5 fields here, copy, and I'll leave 3 columns of space just so it's not cramped together, especially since I'm going to add fields here. So copy this, transpose one more time. Okay. Hit general. And now I'm going to set up two fields where you can enter in data. One for greater than or less than sign, and one for the actual amount. So I'm going to start with the greater than and less than sign. So I'm going to make a black background for the border. I'm just going to do a dark gray just so it can stand out, and make the font white. And under data, I'm going to go to data validation and add a list option. So I'm going to put greater than symbol, comma, less than symbol, close it. I'm going to also bold this so that when I select this, it's going to be easy to see. So by default, I'm going to set it to greater than, because I want to make sure this is filled in. And now what I'm going to do is create another field here where I'm going to actually enter in the value. So that I'm going to highlight in yellow for the border color. Let's say do a dark yellow. And again, I'm going to copy this down, paste, and now I've got my values in here. One thing I'm going to add to this screener is the price, and I can do that using Excel's stock history function. So I'm going to add a date field on here. I just copy the formatting from here, and I'm going to just set this to April 26th. Okay, and I'm going to add a field here for price. And if you have the latest version of Excel, you should see this option called stock history. It allows you to pull the stock prices for any of these stocks. If you don't have access to it, you could pull in data from Google Sheets. Google Sheets has a Google Finance formula that can pull in the share price, and then you could import that into Excel. It takes a bit more work, but in this example, I'm going to use stock history. And the benefit of doing this is I can run a price to earnings multiple by pulling in a recent price. So I'm going to pull in the stock symbol first. Then the start and end date is going to be the same because I just want one price point. The interval is going to be daily, and I don't want any header. I just want the closing price. Okay, and then I'm going to freeze the start and end dates and copy this down. And when you download it, you'll notice some of them have those busy errors, and that just means the data is still calculating because, like I said, I've got 1,000 rows in here, so it's going to take a while for this to all calculate. So this isn't an ideal option if you need up to the second or up to the minute quotes. Google Finances or Google Sheets is probably a bit better on that. But again, this is for the purpose of making it work in this spreadsheet. Stock history probably is going to be preferable, just because, unless the stock moves 10 or 20 percentage points in a day, your price to earnings multiple or any multiples related to price aren't going to change that much if your data is a day old. So for these purposes, it's still going to be able to do the job. So one of the ratios that I can do now is a price to earnings ratio. So I'm going to do that here. I take the price divided by the earnings over the trailing 12 months. And I'm going to add an if error function, just because in case there's no earnings, I'm going to set it to 0 rather than giving me an error. And copy this down. And again, I'll use some formatting on that. And I'll change this field, so instead of earnings it says PE. Okay, so now that I've got all my fields ready to go, the next main thing to do is to actually set up the formulas. Because once I enter in these values, I want to apply formulas to say whether the criteria is true or not. And rather than doing this all in just one gigantic formula, I'm going to separate this into one formula per field. And I'm not going to go through all these fields here because this would obviously be a time-consuming process, and you may use different fields, may need to have different formulas. I'm just going to show you a few examples here of how you would set this up. So let's say I'm going to copy or create a field for market cap here, price to earnings, and let's say the dividend yield. So I want to filter based on all three of these different metrics. So let's say I want to look at market caps of more than $1 trillion. So one thing I'm going to do is specify that this should be in millions. And so I'm going to enter 1 followed by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 zeros. And the reason I'm doing this is I'm not actually going to write out all these zeros, because that's going to be a bit cumbersome, and it can be difficult to keep track of all the zeros if you've entered in the right amount. And that's why using putting it in millions is going to make that easier. So what I'm going to do is set up the criteria for the market cap criteria here to say, okay, is this value more than $1 trillion? And so to do that, I needed to evaluate into either a true or false condition. So I'm going to start with an if function to say, okay, first of all, if this is blank, then set it to true. The reason being is I'm going to assume that if I don't enter a value here, then I want to see all the results regardless of market cap. So that's why I'm setting that to true. If it's not blank, then what I want to do is look at the greater than less than symbol and say, okay, if this is equal to the greater than symbol, then obviously I want to look at market caps that are more than $1 trillion. In that case, I'm going to say, okay, take this value and let's divide it by 1 million. So 1 followed by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then if that is greater than this value. Otherwise, I want to take the value in B13, divide it by 1 million. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then look at if it's less than the value in D2. So if it's not greater than, then it should be less than. Hit enter. And that's what tells me it's true, because obviously Apple's market cap of $2.26 trillion is more than $1 trillion. So I want to freeze these values here, or freeze these cells. Also C2. And then I'm going to copy this down. And so I can see that it starts turning false right here, because Facebook is just under $1 trillion. So the criteria is working correctly. Now let's add another criteria for price to earnings multiple. Let's say I want to look at if the price to earnings multiple is, let's say, more than 40. Amazon's at 80. So I'm going to put that, let's say center that one. And in this case, what I can do is I'm going to copy this formula just to make it a bit easier. I don't need to divide by $1 million, so I'm going to remove that. But one of the cool things about Excel is once you've got these formulas set up, it's as simple as sometimes just dragging these cells over. So rather than keying everything in, I can just do this, and it's going to basically do similar to what I was doing before. Now, the one thing with price to earnings multiple, what I'm going to want to do is use an AND function when I'm looking at less than, because I do not want to include negative values. So I'm going to say I also want to look at, I didn't copy this one over. There we go. So I want to look at if in column Q it's less than this value in H, but I also want to say that cell Q13 also has to be greater than 0, because I do not want to include negatives in here. Hit OK, so it automatically adjusts. And what I can do is copy this down, and now it correctly tells me that this one is over a PE multiple of 80. So anything over 50 is showing up as true. So that is correct. Now let's go over to dividend yield, and let's say I want to look at if a stock pays more than, let's say 5%. Okay, center this as well. And so this is also a good example of paying attention how you want the data to be entered, because if you want someone to not enter the percentage sign, you might need to divide by 100 to turn it into a decimal place. So you need to be cognizant of how the data is going to be entered versus how your data looks on here, right? So because I'm doing percentages, I'm going to keep it simple, and what I'm going to do is, again, I'll copy the market cap formula again, take out these millions, right? And just save a little bit on time here. So again, I'm going to pull it to this field because that's where I want to pull values from. And then this is my greater than field. And the dividend yield is right here. Okay. And so I'm looking at if it's more than 5%. And so I'm going to copy this down, and so there's one true value. So the dividend of 6.2% for ExxonMobil, so that is over 5%. This one is also showing up as true, 6.6%. So as you can see, my screeners do appear to be working correctly. Now the one thing I'm going to do here is insert yet another field, and I'm going to call this criteria met. And the purpose of this is, let's assume that I've created all of these different fields and all these different criteria. You could have columns going all the way out here, but obviously in the interest of time, I'm not going to bore you with going through and creating all these formulas. What I'm going to do now is do a simple comparison to look at, are all these fields equal to true? Because if they're not all true, then I do not want them showing up in my results, right? And that's what the purpose of setting these formulas up, because I need them to equal true or false. Because if you multiply true or false values, a true shows up as a 1, whereas a false value evaluates to 0. So if you have even one false value, these are going to show up as 0 and equal to false. So what I'm going to do is now say, okay, open parentheses, this times this times this. Okay, and I'm going to say greater than 0, because if it's greater than 0, that means everything is true and all the criteria have been met, and so it should be included in my results. If I hit enter now, so that correctly tells me it's false, because I've got more than one false actually in this case. So I can copy this down, and so based on the metrics I selected, it might not find a true value in here, but what I'm going to do now is to pull this all together, I'm going to convert this into a table. I'm going to show you how we can make this a lot more dynamic and easy to update. So I'm going to select anywhere on the data set, go in the Insert tab, hit the Table button, and I have headers, so I'm going to leave that as it is. If you hate the formatting on a table, you can always change it so you get rid of it. And I don't need these fields here. I can hide these. But for the purpose of this example, I'm going to still keep these on here. I'm just going to show you why you don't need these in a second. The purpose of turning it into a table is now I can add slicers to this. And so if I go to Table Design, I'm going to hit Insert Slicer. And I only really want the one that says Criteria Met. I hit OK. And now what it's going to do is it's going to add a slicer on here. And so this tells me that all of my values are false because I don't have anything that meets this criteria. If I change it to, let's say, 1%, then that might change, but perhaps not. So let's say I'll get rid of dividend percentage, and obviously because I'm looking at trillion-dollar companies, that's not going to help. So let's get rid of a few zeros here. And so the beauty of converting it into a table is, actually let me get rid of the grid lines here just to make it easier to stand out. The beauty of turning it into a table and adding a slicer is now I can basically dynamically update these selections. So if I just hit the True button, now I'm going to see only the rows that meet my criteria. So for instance, a market cap of over my threshold here, a PE over this amount, and so you can see I've only got valuations that meet that criteria. And so if I were to change this, let's say, okay, I want to look at a narrower group of stocks. I'm going to increase my market cap. Let's say make my PE multiple over 50. Hit True, and now it updates for me, right? So now the cool thing is now I've got, only price to earnings multiples of more than 50, right? So it can automatically update just by clicking this slicer. So I don't have to add macros, don't have to do anything like that. And so that's why I say, I can hide these fields here because I don't need that anymore. Because I know that they're calculating correctly, and I can just easily update that. So let's say I don't want price to earnings multiples over 50. I want them less than 30. I want some stocks that are a bit cheaper. Hit the True button, and again, now I've got multiples of less than 30. Say I want a dividend yield that pays more than 5%, and I don't want to worry about price to earnings. I don't even care about market cap. I just care about a dividend yield over 5%. Hit the True button, right? And now, let's see, dividend yields, right? These are all over 5%, regardless of market cap, regardless of price to earnings multiples. So, as you can see, that's the real benefit of turning this into a table. It's, what you may have otherwise tried to do with a macro, try to update the table. You can just hit a simple slicer here, and if you make any changes, you can update it right there. So, I'll include a link in the description to the post relating to this video, where you can actually download my completed template that has all these fields set up in case you want to follow along or make your own adjustments or see how I set it up. But obviously you can apply this to any sort of data set that you've got, as long as you're just creating that criteria. The main thing about making this work is having that one field that ties in all that criteria to say, okay, all that criteria met, and then adding the slicer to make it really dynamic and easy to update. It's not going to automatically update just by changing the percent, but it's still pretty close to be in there, at least one click of a button, right? So that's how you can create a screener in Excel. And so, yeah, check out the link if you want more detail or you want to look at the actual file that I created. And other than that, thanks for watching.